Now we have our senior pastor, Bruce Shelton, who is serving as our speaker today. A lot of people might wonder how a small church this size, with a relatively small active congregation, can hold all the things we hold, do all the things we do, and keep the place in good order. Well, a large part of the answer to that riddle is Bruce. He's the unseen wind beneath the wings of almost everything that happens here. He and Marty are the de facto patriarch and matriarch of the fellowship. And he's always a good friend, ready to help anyone, either professionally or personally. So, Bruce Shelton.
Thank you for this opportunity to talk this morning. And it's always my tradition when I speak here to ask, just have a few moments of silence before the talk, to ask that the Holy Spirit will just use me as a speaker this morning to say what needs to be said that can be most healing. So if we can all just have a few moments of silence. Thank you, Lord. All right. Today's talk is going to be, it's entitled An Inconvenient Truth. Now, you all remember that title? Does that ring a bell? That was the title used by Al Gore when he did his documentary on the planet and the environment and how we're harming the planet through the release of toxic waste and so forth. It was an inconvenient truth that we don't want to face, but that's what we've been doing. This title also applies to the way we treat a lot of our animals on this planet. It's an inconvenient truth that there are many animals that are in great suffering, unnecessary suffering, that we really want to pay a little bit of attention to this morning. Now, we love animals. Human beings love animals. When we saw these slides just now, which Francis and Jonelle did so beautifully, our hearts were touched. We just love animals. We realize that animals are basically kindred spirits here on planet Earth. They're sacred beings. They are just a different expression of God. They're the expression of God, but they just do it a little bit differently than we do, right? It's our responsibility to protect these animals and all the animals of the earth, just like it's our responsibility to protect each other. And we do that with a lot of the animals on the planet. We love the animals in the wild, the birds, possums, squirrels, foxes, raccoons, lions. We love animals that are in the wild. We love animals so much we bring some into our home. We have domesticated dogs and cats for thousands of years. And it's very true that we love animals. But there's a second class of animals that is the forgotten class. Specifically, this is the class of animals that are in the captivity of the meat industry, that are raised for food and what they call animal factory farms. We don't like to think about these animals. When we go to the Discovery Channel, we want to see the animals that are free, and we love it. We really, really just don't want to think about what's going on behind these closed doors and closed walls of animal factories, and also in the way these slaughterhouses are run. We just don't want to think about it because it's an inconvenient truth. We feel like there's nothing we can do about it, and the truth is most of us like to eat meat. And so what can we do about it? So we kind of are in denial about the problem. Now, animals have feelings. They experience pain. They have family systems, just like we as humans have family systems. When we take animals and put them in these factory farms, we're doing the exact. We're breaking up these family units. We're taking the kids away, the newborn away from their parents, where they should be, who should be raising them, and it's a very, very sad and cruel situation. I like the way Paul McCarthy put it. He said that if slaughterhouses were all built behind glass walls, everybody would become a vegetarian. Isn't that true? We don't want to really see what's going on behind those glass walls. Now, our collective denial of this problem is the problem, okay? As long as we're in denial that there's a problem and we don't want to face it, the problem can go on indefinitely. So today's talk, in putting this talk together today, I'm thinking, now this is a Sunday morning worship service, you know. I don't really want to go into the details, and I will not do this morning, about what's actually happening behind these factory, behind the walls of these factory farms. I've learned a lot about, in putting this talk together, about what is happening, but we're not going to focus on that. You can discover that for yourself, and I'm going to encourage you to do that. But what we're going to focus on today is proactive things that we can actually do to help these animals. Okay, is everybody with me so far? Okay. So what can we do about the problem? There's three things I'm going to suggest that we can do about the way we mistreat these animals. Number one, the first thing is we've got to educate ourselves as to what the problem is. Okay. We've got to identify the problem. The first step in any problem-solving process is to identify the problem. Okay, it's the first step. So we've got to really take our heads out of the sand and say, you know, the truth is things are going on and we really need to do something about it. It just cannot go on like this indefinitely, like it has been. Now, the Vegetarian Times tells us that 96.3% of all Americans eat meat. Okay, 3.2% are vegetarian, only 0.5% are vegans. Isn't that interesting? So, practically speaking, it's very logical to assume that people are not going to stop eating animals anytime soon. So, the problem that I really want us to focus on today is not so much the fact that we're eating animals, but I really want to focus on what we can do to actually help these animals that are being raised for meat so that they're not treated so cruelly and brutally. You know, there's two main ways animals are raised for meat. One is the type of animal that's raised on a farm. That's the cow that's raised in open pastures with sun. He grazes or she grazes on natural foods on the pastures. That's one way animals are raised. That's the way they should be raised if they're raised for food. The other class of animals, however, and this forgotten class of animals, the other class are raised in these factory farms, which is a totally different situation. Now, it's interesting that 90% of the animals that we eat are fowl. Okay, they're chickens, mainly chickens, and some turkeys. 90% are, and these animals do not come under the protection of the Federal Animal Cruelty Act. Okay? The meat industry was very careful to make sure they were excluded. So there's absolutely no protection for chickens, for example, that are raised in these chicken factories. 48 million people, came out of Consumer Report, I think it was a February issue this year. 48 million people fall sick each year from eating food tainted with salmonella, E. coli, and other contaminants. More deaths were associated with this is a quote, more deaths were associated with the poultry industry than with any other commodity. Okay? So the biggest problem is the way chickens are being raised, because they have no government regulation whatsoever. Now, the way we can educate ourselves as to what is going on, I've said this is the first step, is problem identification, is to watch DVDs, read books. Now, on the handout I gave you, on the back side of it, I've got this front part is from Time Magazine. On the back side, there are I put some names of some books and DVDs that I've looked at that have been very, very helpful. And the internet is great in this respect, because we can go on the internet and find out anything we want to find out about. So I really recommend you consider some of those books, and especially some of those DVDs, which is so easy to see. Now, the second thing, I said there's three things and proposals I was going to recommend. The second thing that we can do to help these animals is to support an animal advocacy group, okay? In our own backyard, we have PETA. This morning, this wonderful woman came today with animal, well, actually, it was Amanda came today with animal, what's it called?
Hope for Life.
Hope for Life Rescue. And then this, Diane, is that your name? Diane came and she's representing another. So we, in our own community, within, a stone's throw of here, we have some animal advocacy groups. So the very least we can do is to support these animal advocacy groups. This picture that I showed you, that I showed everybody, sorry. Pull it out. This is a really impressive one called Farm Sanctuary. This was in Time magazine. I think it was a February issue, and it features the founder of Farm Sanctuary named Gene Bow, and this guy really knows how to present himself. He's the guy who knows how to go to Congress and really represent animals and get things done. If you read this article, I was just very impressed. I was so impressed I joined Farm Sanctuary, and this is the organization I've chosen to financially support because I think they're really doing a great job. For example, in one of the 10 questions he was asked, it says, "You're a vegan. Isn't it possible to eat eggs or wear wool without harming anything?" Now, he gave an answer that I thought was just very practical and fair. He said, whenever animals are seen as units for production, there are problems with the way we relate to them. If you have chickens who are your companions and are laying eggs, then I don't see an ethical problem with eating the eggs. But if you're getting chickens from a hatchery that's breeding them to be mass production eggs, you have male chicks that are killed the day they are born because they're not economically viable. See, it's a very practical answer, and that's what I like about this guy. He's down to earth. And that is true. When chickens are raised or hatched today, all the male chickens are immediately killed. They're not economically viable. For some reason, the female chickens are the ones they raise, these are the ones we buy at the supermarket. So the male chicks are just killed immediately. And so one of the reasons we have a great need for animal advocacy groups is that the Congress is very much influenced by the lobbyists of the meat industry. The meat industry ensured long ago that it's not the Federal Food and Drug Administration that regulates the food industry. It's actually the Department of Agriculture. U.S.
Now we have our
Department of
senior pastor,
Agriculture
Bruce Shelton,
is the
who's
department
serving as our speaker
that
today.
moderates and regulates
A lot of people
the
might
food industry.
wonder how a small church
There's a big
this
problem with
size,
this.
a relatively
The Department of
small
Agriculture, these
congregation,
panels are
can
very
hold
much
all the things
influenced
we
by the
hold,
food
do all the
industry.
things we do, and keep the place
Dr.
in
Neil
order.
Bernard, who's a
Well, large
nationally
part of the
known
answer
medical
to that
doctor,
riddle is
nationally
Bruce.
known advocate
He's
for
the
animals,
unseen wind
states that
beneath
6
the
out of
wings
11 members of the
almost everything that happens here.
people,
He and Marty are the de facto patriarch.
6 of 11 members of the
and he's always
individuals
a good friend, ready to help
who
anyone,
are on
professionally
a key
or
panel.
personally.
6 of 11 are actually have a financial interest with the food industry. In other words, they're paid lobbyists. 6 of the 11 people making the decisions as to how these animals are to be regulated are actually, paid lobbyists, or they have financial interest investments with the food industry. With the meat industry. There's a big problem with that. Dr. Colin Campbell, another national leader with the food advocacy groups, states that recently the Food and Nutrition Board and Dietary Guidelines Committee were chaired by the same person who is also a major consultant for the dairy industry. So you see, we're having decisions made that are made not by individuals who really are representing the best interest of animals and human beings. They're representing the financial interest of the meat industry. This is a big problem. Who is out there now to deal with this problem? The only ones out there are these these animal advocacy groups. That's why we really need to support them. In this little article here is an example of the problem. They just passed this proposition called Proposition 2 in California, in which all that happened was they asked that the chickens be allowed to have enough room to stand up and turn around in the cages. That's all. Now you'd think that wouldn't have to have a new regulation to deal with that, right? Now none of the other states even have this, but it had Proposition 2 in California, and let me read what Gene Bao had to say about that. He said, Proposition 2 prohibits the confinement of animals in cages and crates where they can't turn around or stretch their limbs. Industry is still fighting this. And then he goes on to talk a little bit, but there's even that minor change, just to have enough room to turn around. Can you see the problem? You see, there needs to be some regulations that presents a little bit of humanity to these animals. If you look at pictures, of all these animal facts, especially the chicken hatcheries, the animals are just cramped together and they spend their entire life like that. The only ones fighting on their behalf are these animal advocacy groups. That's why it's so important that we find groups like this and that we do all we can to support them. All right, now the third proposal I'm going to suggest to you that we can consider doing to help these animals, this is more personal, is that we consider the value of an animal-free diet. Okay? There are two possible advantages to eating a diet in which we no longer are including animals as a part of the diet. Number one, it helps. Obviously, it's good for the animals. It means they can live and they'll no longer be a part of. We're not supporting the meat industry anymore. Number two, it may actually be very good for our health to eliminate animals from our diet. I say that because there's a great deal of research to support that statement. We have in our country, for example, right now, a huge problem with obesity. 1/3 of all Americans are classified to actually be in the obese category. 1/3. A second third of Americans are above the safe weight, the range of a safe rate, meaning only 1/3 of us in this room, most likely, are actually in the really what you call this healthy range. So obesity is starting to have a huge effect on it's actually an epidemic. It's almost killing more people now in America than tobacco smoke has been killing. It's almost getting up there to the 400,000 range that's how many Americans die every year from obesity. Now obesity is largely influenced is of course influenced by what we eat. And an animal-free dairy, especially a dairy-free diet, can actually have a huge impact on helping us to keep our weight under control. Now, in 1990, a study came out called the China Study. Anybody in this room ever heard of that, the China Study? The China Study is a fascinating study. It was put together by the chief architect of it was a fellow named Dr. Colin Campbell. He's featured in that great DVD, Forks Over Knives, that I've written down for you. But anyway, to make a long story short, he found that the results of this study found that whole plant foods result in a substantial reduction in heart disease, stroke, and certain cancers. Animal foods do not. Specifically, his study found that there was a 26% lower chance of dying from heart disease if you eliminated animals and dairy from your diet. This study has been duplicated repeatedly in other areas of the world. For example, a while back, Dr. Oz did one of his little great shows, and he went to the 4 places in the world where people had the longest longevity and lived the most, not just live longer, but lived healthfully longer. And one of the places, surprisingly, was in America, Loma Linda in California. Now, so he went there and flew in there with his team and said, why are the people here living longer? Well, it turns out that most of the people there are Seventh-day Adventists who do not eat meat or dairy as a part of their religious beliefs. and they're living longer and doing better than they're one of the 4 places in the world where people live longer and do better. Very impressive. That was Dr. Colin Campbell with the China study. Another doctor named Dr. Cardwell Esselstyn with the Cleveland Heart Center, he read this China study. Now, he was a heart surgeon. He'd been doing heart surgery for a year. He was also featured in this great DVD called Forks Over Knives. And he said, he's done thousands at that point. He'd done thousands of heart surgeries. And he says, at a certain point, he realized that heart surgery is like putting a Band-Aid over the problem. He said, the problem can best be solved by prevention in the first place. That's the problem. And he said all these medications that are being used very often just kind of are like putting Band-Aids over the problem. He says, if this China study, the results of this study actually are accurate, maybe we can apply this to heart patients. So he got permission from his clinic got 24 patients, heart patients, and he got permission for them to be put strictly on a vegan diet. That means no food, no dairy, and no meat. Sorry. Just making sure you're still awake out there. No meat, no dairy, and had 24 patients. Now, this is what happened. After the first year, 6 of the patients dropped out because they couldn't stick with this diet. But the other 18 patients, 5 years later, they were all still alive. These were patients who had serious cardiovascular problems. 5 years later, they were still alive. With 12 of those patients, their heart disease, the progression had been stopped. In other words, it had not gotten any worse. And with 4 of them, the symptoms had been put into remission. Now, this is profound. He had taken all these patients now it's interesting, the patients he was given, he explains this in the DVD, were all patients that the other doctors had given up on. The other doctors thought this study, of course, is not going to work. You take them off all the heart meds and you only put them on a vegan diet. Give me a break, But they figured these patients are going to die anyway. So he had the patients who really were the most sick patients. And 5 years later, they were all still alive. Let me check that figure on that. I think it was actually a little longer than that. 12 years later, they were all still alive. 12 years later. Once again, they off all medicines and just taking just following this vegan diet. This is profound. Guess what? We're getting older in this room, aren't we? A lot of us. And illnesses are starting to creep in. It's called getting older. And if it turns out that maybe a radical change to our diet in which we stop eating animals might really help us even more so than all the pharmaceuticals the doctors want to give us, what if there's some truth to this? This is profound. And now there's a lot of science to back up that actually this can actually be the truth. Now, when you talk about heart studies and China studies and statistics, that's one thing, but it's all very impersonal. But when you talk about somebody you know personally, it becomes much more interesting, much more meaningful. So I'd like to share with you the story of a friend of mine who lives 2 doors from us. His name is Jimmy. Jimmy is 77 years of age, and when he was 68 years of age, this was 9 years ago, he was out in his yard cutting the grass and he felt chest pains. He was 68 years old at that time. He went to the doctor. The doctor says, "Man, you've got a terrible heart problem. You're going to die. You need to have immediate," he said, "quadruple heart surgery." He says, "If you don't have that immediately, you're going to die." Okay? End of discussion. "Do you want the surgery today?" He said, "No." So he went to he went to 2 other heart surgeons because he didn't want to hear that answer. And guess what? They said the same thing. So Jimmy is an engineer, a very intelligent guy, and he says, he went on the internet. This is 2006 when the internet finally was here, and he found this. Guess who he found? Dr. Esselstyn, the same doctor I just shared with you. And he called Dr. Esselstyn, told him his situation, and Dr. Esselstyn, the way he does work, and this is once again is on this wonderful DVD called Forks Over Knives. the way he does this is he actually invites patients he's going to work with into his home, gives them a vegan meal to let them see what it actually is extremely tasty, how good it can be, and educates them as to what a vegan diet actually is all about. Well, 9 years later, I just talked to Jimmy last Friday about this and got his permission to share his story. He's in good health. He got totally off of all the medication. Well, he's still taking a statin drug. Later on, he decided to take a statin drug. But that's the only medication he's taken. This is the guy that was told by 3 doctors in 2006 he needed to have immediate quadruple heart surgery. He was going to die. He went on this doggone vegan diet, and he has to do it very strict. But he said in the first 8 to 9 months he lost 40 pounds. And he radically changed his diet. I says, "What? Do you remember exactly when you started?" He says, "Yeah, you can remember the exact date. It was August 16th, 2006, because that quote, this was the day of my last eating frenzy at Dumars," end quote. So this is amazing, isn't it? Now, I'd like to end my talk here just by going one step further and tell you about my personal experience with the vegan diet. 2 years ago, it was exactly 2 years ago when we had the Blessing of the Animals service, and it was a Saturday night before that. I had this thought about it'd be interesting just to learn more about the vegan diet. I could never imagine myself becoming a vegetarian, much less a vegan. I couldn't imagine that. Why? I'm like most of you. I love my chicken, I love my ice cream, I love my cheese, and I love my yogurt. Forget it, There's no way I was going to give that up. So that was my mindset, and I was 66 years of age. I'd been like this all my life. Now, I had been following the Casey diet for many years since I was about 25. So I had not been eating red meats, and I'd eaten a pretty good diet, and I've been in pretty good health. But anyway, I saw this DVD. I felt like I was led to it, called Vegucated. It's on one of the two DVDs I recommended to you. And it really moved me. And I thought, darn, maybe I should at least try this diet, And I remember the next morning I came here and we had the Blessing of the Animals, and I said, I think I'm going to try having an animal-free diet for a while. And that Sunday afternoon, I said, let's all go to the Heritage Cafe, because I knew they had good vegan food there. I wanted to see if I could find a good vegan food. One of the 2 reasons I really didn't want to do this diet is because I thought, number one, vegan food would be boring. I thought, you can only eat so many salads before you start getting sick of them, right? I thought that was the vegan diet. And then number 2, I couldn't see how you get enough meat, enough protein, if you eliminated meat from your diet. I just couldn't. It just practically didn't seem practical to me. I thought you'd have a protein deficiency. So anyway, I learned pretty quickly that number one, vegan food can be extremely good, or vegetarian food, if you include dairy, can taste extremely good. It just has to be prepared properly. And number 2, you really can get sufficient proteins just from vegetables. For example, Dr. Campbell points out that even the vegetables with the least proteins, when we talk about proteins, we're simply talking about amino acids. Okay, he says the vegetables with the least proteins, which are like potatoes, have got 8 to 9% amino acids content. And he said that the most that really we need as human beings to have a healthy diet is 10% proteins. Now, you eat spinach, or you eat collards, the leafy green vegetables. They have amino contents up to 50%. Okay, protein. So it's a fallacy to think that you have to eat animals to get sufficient protein. And I had learned that just as part of my research. Well, that Sunday night, because now I was really kind of interested, had a good vegan meal at the Heritage store. So this does taste pretty good. I saw this great DVD. It's the 4th time I've said this, Forks Over Knives, which really did it for me. And I really am saying that because I really hope you'll consider take some time reading that. You can see it on Netflix, or actually it's not on Netflix. I had to order it, but it's a really great DVD. But anyway, I've been on this vegan diet now for 2 years today, and I'd like to tell you what happened. I was on a strict vegan diet, started September, went through about February, and I've always had pretty good health, but I had one medical problem that just wouldn't go away that deeply worried me. It was it's a skin rash called eczema. Anybody ever know anybody that's got eczema? Just a skin rash over different parts of the body. It would be there about 50% of the time. And it was like psoriasis, but it's a milder form of psoriasis. And I went to my dermatologist. He says, we don't know what causes it. We have no cure for it. Okay? So for 10 years, I had this problem with this skin rash. And I went and saw what Edgar Casey had to say about it. Edgar Casey said that psoriasis and its milder form, eczema, is caused when your intestinal tract begins to have perforations or pores that start to form over time, which allows toxins to escape from your intestinal tract, get into the bloodstream, and then the body has to eliminate these toxins, and it comes out through your skin, which is an eliminatory organ, and in the form of a rash. And so I thought, now, if this is true, that means my intestinal tract has got problems, you know. And I'm thinking, if I'm having problems in my 60s with this intestinal, how am I going to be when I'm in my 80s? But there was no solution. Well, when I started this vegan diet, I really didn't have a thought that this was going to really impact it. But in February, I said I started in September. In February, the rash went away, and it didn't come back until November. It went for 6 months, which is the longest it ever. Usually it's not gone for more than 2 or 3 weeks. Went for 6 months. I thought I'd lost it, actually. Came back when I was in Nepal walking, and the rash came back. And but then it came back for 2 weeks, left, and since last November, it's never come back. So, in other words, since February of 2013 until today, October of 2014, I've had one relapse. Now, there's just no reason that this rash would stop. You know, there's no reason other than, there's nothing else I did differently other than I really changed my diet. So this is an example of how, if you're having any type of health problems, you might consider, you know, just do the research on it. Don't go out and be a vegan today, but just at least do it like I did. Just do some research on it and try it and see what happens. I do, in the interest of full disclosure, what actually also happened to me during the course of this experience is about a year and a half, around the spring of last year, I also started to relax a little bit on the diet, so that I allowed myself to start eating fish. You know, it's just in a seafood town like this, I just couldn't give up the fish. You know, so I allowed myself to start eating fish. Occasionally, if I'm in a restaurant and there's cheese on the salad, I allow myself to do that. So I am not a strict vegan. But my goal is to have 90% of my diet is vegan. 10% is fish. You know, I eat fish maybe once or twice a week, and some cheese. So the idea is you don't have to be radical about this. If it's too radical to give it all up, think in terms of at least reducing your meat consumption. So the last thing I want to say is that, in closing, is that we don't want to make a religion out of our diet. The bottom line is, if you eat meat and it feels right to you, that's okay. The main thing is to bless our food before we eat it. Bless the animals that gave us this food. The Dalai Lama was asked, in Buddhism, it's very important that you be a vegetarian and not eat meat. And so the Dalai Lama, when he's in Asia, will not eat meat. But when he comes to this country, and in the West, he eats meat. And he was asked, why? How can you do this? You know, you're a Buddhist. You're a leader of the Buddhists. He says, because I got used to it. That was his answer. I got used to it. Now, it's a flippant answer, but I think the message that he was giving us is that we don't want to get hung up on diets. You know, spirituality and finding God and awakening to who we are is not about what we put into our mouth. It's what's going on inside our minds that's important. So he's saying, yeah, the diet's fine, but don't get hung up on it. Do what feels right to you. Okay? So with those words, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.